Hello and welcome to the Injury Report for Week 10. I'm your host, Josh Shepardson, and you can follow me on Twitter where I post is at BChat50. And we've got injuries stacked at every position this week, offensive skill position that is. Starting with quarterback, Josh McCown is listed as questionable, and head coach Mike Patton is not announcing a starter for Sunday's game until game time. So while it looks like Josh McCown is probably going to be the starter, that seems to be the preference if he's healthy enough and his health has improved throughout the week, reportedly. No declaration until game time means that he needs to be glued to benches or left on the waiver wire. He's not a starter this week. Don't like the total in that game anyway, so it's not much of a loss. But go ahead and bypass Josh McCown if you were thinking about even contemplating using him. Next up is Andrew Luck of the Indianapolis Colts. He's on bye this week, but he's going to miss up to a month. If you invested a first-round pick or, well, whatever you invested in him in draft day, you're certainly not recouping that. He's not going to deliver on that value. If you're in a shallow league, you can go ahead and cut ties with him at this point. If you are in a larger league, might be worth kicking the tires on a trade offer with somebody near the top of your standings that has the luxury of sitting and waiting for him to get back. But don't expect much of a return on him. Usually I don't like to feature guys who are on bye in the article, but given the stature of Andrew Luck and while the draft day cost to acquire him, he was worth mentioning this week. Next up is Teddy Bridgewater of the Minnesota Vikings, who suffered a concussion after a vicious hit in Week 9. He's listed as questionable, but head coach Mike Zimmer has indicated that he expects Teddy Bridgewater to play. There's no indication that he's not going to play, but until he officially passes through the concussion protocol, then we can't be 100% certain that he's going to play. But all signs are pointing toward Teddy Bridgewater getting reps and starting this week. Finally, a quarterback. Look at the other side of that Pittsburgh Steelers Cleveland Browns game, and surprisingly, Big Ben listed as questionable. I would have expected doubtful, but he's practiced in a limited capacity on Thursday and Friday. And while Mike Vick noted he was limping after practice on Friday, he hasn't ruled himself out yet, and this could be a tolerance thing with Roethlisberger, but with the team on bye next week, I don't see any reason for them to push it with their franchise quarterback and get him an extra week of rest if they just hold him out this week and sit through the bye next week. And considering they are favorites already at home, even with the expectation being that Landry Jones will start, I don't think Big Ben will go. But until he is ruled out, I guess the door is ajar, so you want to keep tabs on that. Next up, let's move to running backs. And Matt Forte listed as questionable with a knee injury. But if you followed this column last week, you know that Chris Mortensen had indicated that Matt Forte would miss at least 2 weeks. Looks like he's probably going to miss this contest, but he is still listed as just questionable, not doubtful. He hasn't been ruled out yet. So you can follow that situation, but all signs point toward Forte being out again, Langford being the starter. The Rams have a stout run defense, so Langford won't have the benefit of facing a soft defense like he did last week, and at best, he's really only a flex play, but and that's only in large leagues. Game flow isn't going to work in his favor, and he's not the pass-catching back that Forte is, so his value is somewhat limited, but anytime you've got a feature back, you have to at least consider them as a flex starter. Dion Lewis is next up on the injury list, and he's out for the season with a torn ACL. LeGarrette Blount should play the bulk of the snaps in the backfield. James White, maybe Brandon Bolden will see some additional time. But the guy that I think is going to have the biggest boost to his value is a guy I wrote about earlier in the week, podcasted about earlier in the week, and that's Danny Amendola. Thrived in Dion Lewis's other game absent this year, and also thrived in another contest where Lewis's snaps were limited. So I think Amendola is going to step up in that short passing game for the Patriots. Makes for a sneaky flex play this week, a bit a boom or bust option since there are so many mouths to feed in that offense, but Patriots have the biggest over-under total this week, so at least warrants some consideration. And the last running back we're going to discuss is Latavius Murray, who suffered a concussion last week. Is reportedly not suffering any symptoms at this point, and he's already practiced in a limited capacity, so everything's trending the right way. Because he hasn't gone through a full practice, it's a pretty good indication that he has not passed through the NFL's concussion protocol completely yet, but the fact that he's symptom-free is huge, and the fact that he's already practicing even in a limited capacity is a good indicator that he's probably going to be playing on Sunday. But again, until he officially passes through that, then you do have to continue to monitor things with him. Moving on to wide receivers and tight ends, John Brown is listed as questionable with a hamstring injury. He's been a limited practice participant this week for the Cardinals. Was active for their last game before the Week 9 bye, but did not play a single offensive snap. All signs point toward him playing, but since he's less than 100% and he's facing a really talented Seahawks secondary, I would advise against starting him, especially in shallower leagues where you've got a lot of options. But unless you're in an extremely large league where the options are very limited or your team is just ravaged with buys and injuries, if you could find somebody that's semi-interesting, maybe even a couple of guys who I'll discuss later, Cecil Shorts and Nate Washington, guys like that should have game flow working in their favor, should have a softer matchup. I would prefer lean in that direction as opposed to Brown, because even at 100%, this wouldn't be an ideal matchup, but at less than 100%, not a huge fan. Next up is Alshon Jeffrey, who actually aggravated his groin injury in practice this week. Listed as questionable, but he did practice in a limited capacity on Friday, so that's a pretty good indicator that he's at least feeling better at this point, and you wouldn't expect the team to push him to a full practice when he's dealt with that groin injury throughout the year. There's no benefit to pushing him harder in practice. Let that thing heal up. I don't see anything indicating that he's really in much danger of missing this contest. And as long as he plays, he's matchup proof at this point. He's leading the league in receiving yards per game, so he's a must start every week. Manuel Sanders is another elite receiver, and he's listed as questionable with an ankle injury, and it seems like he truly is questionable. Gary Kubiak's gut reportedly tells him that Sanders will be ready to play Sunday, but anytime you're relying on a coach's gut instinct, that's a pretty good indicator that it's far from certain. He has not practiced this week. During the Friday media open portion of practice, he was spotted on the sidelines and not practicing. So he wouldn't be the first player this year that hasn't practiced during the week and suited up. OBJ comes to mind, but not a good indicator going into the weekend. And with a 4:25 start time, ideally the Broncos will leak before the 1 o'clock start times whether he's a go or not, because he has a cushy matchup. And if you can get Sanders in there, even if he's at 70% against the most giving secondary, that's something you're going to want to do. But if he's going to be inactive, you're going to have some options to fill in for him. And with a 4:25 start time, that makes things very difficult. Next up is Calvin Johnson, who did not practice Friday, but he continues to insist he's going to play. I'm guessing he will go based on his words and the fact that there is absolutely no concern really around the net about his availability this weekend. And with the Lions, the biggest underdogs this week, they're going to be playing catch up probably right out of the gate. And that should mean a heavy dose of Megatron, and a heavy dose of Megatron means a very high ceiling. He's an obvious start every week anyway, but the ceiling is pretty high as long as he doesn't suffer any setbacks between now and the game on Sunday. From the same contest, James Jones is listed as questionable with a quad injury. Aggravated his quad in practice this week, but he did practice in a limited capacity on Thursday. And the fact that he's practicing is good, but the fact that he aggravated the injury throughout the week is not good. Seems like it's a true 50-50 proposition, but as he's practicing, I'm going to say that it's probably a little bit closer to the probable side of things as opposed to the doubtful side of things. So keep that in mind when you're setting your lineups this weekend. Cecil Shorts and Nate Washington both have various injuries. Shorts and Washington hip, both listed as questionable. Schwartz appears to be closer to playing. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised to see him upgraded to probable over the weekend since he has practiced in a full capacity all week. Washington was only a partial practice participant on Thursday, and he appears to be truly questionable. But with the Monday Night Football contest, it's possible they're easing him into the weekend since there isn't any to really ramp up his activity for a Sunday contest. If Washington misses the contest, Schwartz gets a slight value boost since he'll have one less person to compete with touches for. If both are healthy, both make 4 low-end flex plays just because the Texans are big underdogs, second biggest underdogs of the week. They don't have much of a running game, and they've shown a propensity for passing the ball quite a bit this year. And while Nuke will soak up most of those targets, there are plenty of targets to go around. They really don't have a pass-catching tight end that's going to cut into things. And with Arian Foster out, they don't have a back that's a huge pass-catching threat. So all 3 wide receivers can have fantasy relevant lines. But again, if Nate Washington's out and it's just Cecil Shorts and DeAndre Hopkins, Shorts gets a nice little value boost. Next up, look at another receiver from the same conference, and that's Allen Hurns of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Foot and thigh injuries have him listed as questionable, but took part in Friday's walkthrough. And after missing practice on Wednesday and Thursday, he's been nicked up all year. They continue to take it easy on him in practice, but he continues to play, and he reports that he's confident that he'll be able to play. And so far, he's been true to his word. He continues to play through the nagging injuries, and he continues to play at a high level. And this week, he gets the Baltimore Ravens, who have allowed the second most fantasy points to wide receivers this year. So absolutely dreamy matchup this week. Gotta love Allen Hurns as long as he doesn't suffer any setbacks before Sunday. I expect him to play. I think everybody and their brother expects him to play. And he and Blake Bortles should put up some numbers this weekend. Next up is Willie Snead of the Saints. Snead did not practice on Thursday, but he did return to practice on Friday, though it's not clear how much he participated in practice on Friday. Going to want to keep an eye on that, see what new news comes out regarding his practice participation. He is another guy who has been limited in practice throughout the season because he has battled this knee injury, but he continues to play. He's a strong start as a wide receiver 3 or a flex as long as he plays. Big total in that game against Washington. Gotta like Snead since he has been one of Drew Brees' favorite targets. Next up is the Bucs with Vincent Jackson already ruled out, and Austin Seferian-Jenkins listed as questionable, albeit a little bit more leaning close towards the doubtful side, with Lovie Smith indicating that he's not exactly confident that ASJ is going to be ready to go this weekend, which is a bummer. Tight end, your top options have great matchups this week, but he was a guy that I was looking at as a possible stream option on a week where not a lot of the giving defenses are facing a widely available tight end. So that's a bit of a bummer, but if both are out, you can certainly expect another monster workload from Mike Evans. Upwards of more than a dozen targets would be very, very attainable for Evans again this week. Finally, Kendall Wright ruled out once again. The Titans are hosting the Panthers. This is one of the toughest pass defenses in the league, second ranked at Football Outsiders. They've allowed the second net yards per pass attempt this year, trailing only the Broncos. And that pretty much takes the receivers off the board for me. Dorial Green-Beckham looked good last week, but Josh Norman, capable of shutting down more talented, more experienced, more savvy receivers than DGB. And Harry Douglas, ceiling is just not worth taking that chance against a secondary that's been so good. Delaney Walker, though, he did have a bit of a fluky, lucky game last week with the batted ball touchdown for 61 yards and another touchdown. But he's been good this year, and he is their clear top pass-catching threat with Kendall Wright out. So even against a stout defense like that, I do think he is startable this week, top 12 option at the position. So that's going to wrap things up. Keep an eye on these injuries. Check out fantasyfootballcafe.com for all your fantasy football needs. We've got video podcasts like this one. We've got articles, and we've got a very active forum where You can follow these injuries. People are staying on top of that sort of thing. Or if you have some questions as maybe your league's trade deadline approaches, get on there, ask some questions. Very helpful community that very insightful and very enthusiastic about fantasy football. Till next week, good luck.